waiting on his family, and in particular his wife. Army physician Reuben Berman, for example, wrote to his children and told them, quote, "I would like to suggest to all of you, especially David, Betsy, and Sammy," right, his three oldest children, aged 10, 7, and 6, respectively, quote, "that you try to help Mommy as much as possible," he told them. He clarified, "help by not doing things that make extra work." Right? Already burdened by having to raise their children in the absence of their husbands, wives could ill afford to take on additional domestic work and trouble around the home. Moreover, although Reuben's wife Isabel did not work outside of the home during her husband's long time away, many wives did. In fact, a rapid increase in the size of the armed forces created a labor shortage on the home front, which we conveniently filled with women. Right? And this was something that the U.S. government took very seriously. They created, well, like, for lack of a better word, propaganda, right? To bring these women in. They've been told to stay at home, be a stay-at-home mom their entire lives, and now all of a sudden there's no one to work, so now they're told, hey, get out and start doing some work, right? So this is just one of, I don't know, hundreds of posters that were targeted to women, trying to get them to go to work in the factories. This is a 1942 poster put out by the Women's Bureau, and it shows a series of pictures of women in the process of working, and the captions inform its audiences that women can work a variety of jobs, right? One of the captions says here, "radio transmitters respond to a woman's touch." Another caption reads that, or shows that a female factory soldier, right, that's what it says, explains her task on the production line. And then yet another, a woman packs shoes to ship abroad so that, quote, "the army can march on." So apparently such propaganda was as effective as Elaine Talleyrand, another historian, has noted that between 1940 and 1945, the female labor force grew by over 50%. Right? And local historian Harold Morgan's book, Homefront Heroes, which they have here at the Willard, details a variety of work that local women did here in the Evansville area, including inspecting rocket nozzles at the Sunbeam Electric plant, welding at the shipyard, and joining the WWII, the Women's Army Corps, or the WASPs, the Women Auxiliary Service Pilots. Right? So in addition to working outside of the home in either factories or on the farm, many women also juggled their daily responsibilities with volunteer obligations. Women helped organize a variety of wartime activities. They participated in civil defense exercises, they planted victory gardens, they attended patriotic exhibitions, and they watched other women's children during their off hours. Amanda Akbar-Betty, an Evansville native, for example, opened her home to hundreds of hungry servicemen every week during the war, serving them home-cooked fried chicken dinners. I'm 35, but I still have never made fried chicken. It's really beyond my ability, and yet this woman did it, every week for 100 folks. Right? And that's incredible. So, with Dad off fighting the war and Mom off to work or otherwise occupied with home front war activities, children in general and girls in particular had to pick up a lot of slack in the home. So that's what I'm talking about when I say that they become supporters. For girls, war work also meant an increase in domestic responsibilities. Right? New York Children's Aid Society, for example, hosted cooking competitions for young girls throughout the war years. Competitors were asked to make price-cutting suppers based on healthy substitutes for meat and other scarce foods. 1944's winner, Frances Brady, age 12, was selected because she, quote, "spent most of her time helping take care of her sister and 4 brothers while her widowed mother worked." The accompanying article praised Brady for prepping, quote, "supper for the entire family every night." And Frances was not alone. Tens of thousands of girls joined her and redoubled their efforts to ensure that their households functioned smoothly, despite the war inconveniences it forced upon families. Now, many radio programs that children listened to unmistakably associated the female sex with this kind of reproductive labor, right, domestic labor, like taking care of and feeding their families. And we hear that particularly in the commercials that are present throughout these radio programs. These commercials that air during these programs best articulate that connection between women and their expected domestic duties. For example, during the war years, dozens of episodes from Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy, began with different commercial variations for Wheaties, a popular breakfast cereal. Now, these short commercials made clear that it was the homemaker's responsibility to feed her family. In most of them, mom was portrayed as the one responsible for ensuring that her son started off his day with a bowl full of Wheaties. Right? In one episode from late 1940, Chuck, the young son, is snoring through his alarm clock, even after his mother implores him to turn it off. Only when his mother tells him that she has already poured his Wheaties does Chuck finally jump out of bed. Right? So, therefore, we can see that women were responsible, right, for prepping meals for their loved ones. In another children's favorite radio program, Terry and the Pirates, the announcer, as well as the show's character, tried to sell children a Terry-scope, which was a telescope that Terry used in a lot of his adventures. In addition to telling children to send in their Libby's juice labels to procure the scope, the announcer told his listeners to implore mom for help in procuring these Libby's juice. He says, quote, "Ask your mother right after the show to get Libby's tomato juice and Libby's pineapple juice tomorrow." Right? Thus, women were responsible for shopping for their families. Clearly then, children's radio programs normalized reproductive labor and its connection to women. Now, as future mothers and wives in charge of household economy, or at least of the shopping list, pre-adolescent girls who listened to these episodes would have internalized these messages. If mom was the one responsible for ensuring that Chuck ate his Wheaties, then, her daughter would basically realize that it was her job too in the future. Now, part of being a conscientious caretaker was ensuring that there was enough resources to last. This important message was relayed through a variety of media, including children's radio programs, and it was particularly pertinent considering the fact that the federal government started issuing rationing booklets shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The April 9, 1943 message from Captain Midnight, it was a message specifically, quote, for wives and mothers, demonstrates the challenges that women had in fulfilling their domestic obligations under rationing regulations. The announcer sympathized with the difficult task women had in planning wartime meals when, quote, some of our favorite highly nourishing foods were scarce or rationed. He lamented how, quote, it's harder than ever to be sure your family's getting all the food value and especially all the vitamins and minerals they need. Happily, however, the announcer told his woman that there was no reason to be concerned about vitamin and mineral shortages as long as the children drank Ovaltine. So, according to Captain Midnight, nourishing one's family even during the war was easy if you made the right selections in the grocery aisle. Now, once again, knowing that they too were expected to grow up and make similar decisions, little girls probably listened closely to that message. Now, writing letters to those serving overseas was also an important contribution to the war effort as it helped support troops by boosting their morale. With many men abroad, letter writing often fell on the shoulders of those who remained behind, that is, wives and the young, in particular young girls, frequently cheered on by teachers, parents, and society as a whole to embrace their natural talents in creative arts and English. Like their mothers, little girls flocked to letter writing. Children were often targeted for letter writing campaigns, and radio seemed a great way to enlist boys and girls for such a duty. Jack Armstrong's All-American Boy, for example, did a particularly good job of recruiting children to write letters. Reportedly, they enlisted over 1 million boys and girls in the Write a Fighter campaign in 1943 alone. Now, children sent away for their free booklet, and this is what's pictured here. So they get this free booklet, and they would establish their own squadron of letter writers, or as they called them, fighter pilots. Led by a squadron leader, boys and girls pledged to write a fighter of their choice once a month. Though it's impossible to guess the boy-to-girl ratio within the WAFC, given the fact that girls typically wrote more letters than boys, it is not improbable to imagine that they comprise a slight majority of members. Indeed, perhaps it is only fitting that one of the few copies of this Write a Fighter for Beginners booklet still in print circulation lists almost all girls' names, right? Sarah, Berta, Catherine, and Carolyn. And then there's Marion, who could be a boy or girl. Now, letter writing was not the only way in which girls could fulfill their wartime duties and raise morale among enlisted men. Indeed, Uncle Sam and community organizations often encouraged interaction between soldiers headed overseas and girls on the home front. These Liberty Bells were typically young women aged 17 to 25 who were bused into camps to boost morale and to, quote, be sympathetic troubles. Evansville's own Miss Paget, for example, was the chief USO hostess at Camp Breckenridge, and she brought in entertainers, including 800 young female volunteers with an organization that she created called the Girls Service Organization, and she bussed them into Camp Breckenridge to entertain the soldiers. Now, although these Liberty Bells restricted volunteers to teenage girls or to young women, oftentimes the younger girls, pre-adolescent girls, managed to weasel their way in there too. Right? In North Platte, Nebraska, for example, 12-year-old Doris Dotson and her friends, quote, jitterbug to the jukebox, encouraging soldiers to have fun during the brief stop for the trains to refuel. Now, Dotson reminisced, quote, the boys would pass up the food table to come down and dance with me and my friends. She continued, as far as I was concerned, I was being very patriotic. Yes, I'm sure she was. Right? Though, of course, patriotism could not be contained in a party atmosphere. It spilled out into everyday lives of girls at home. Indeed, patriotism was the reason many young girls began to work for the world effort in every possible way, that is, to mobilize. So now we're going to talk about how they were soldiers. One Nebraska farm girl divulged, I became fiercely patriotic. Right? Following up her statement, she confided, I participated in every war effort that I could. Thus, by the time America sent its first soldiers to the war front, its girls were in the process of transforming themselves into soldiers on the home front. Their wartime duties and responsibilities included collecting scrap, buying and selling war savings stamps and bonds, and learning the correct way of doing things so as to set a good example for others. Little Orphan Annie, again, was perhaps the first character to inspire children to collect scrap during World War II, as her Junior Commandos initially appeared in the comic strip format in 1942. The Little Orphan Annie radio program, however, soon followed suit and tried to get kids to sign up that way as well. To the delight of parents, press, and war production officials, children inspired by Annie's heroism and sacrifice in the comic strip and on the radio founded chapters of Junior Commandos all along the United States. In just 2 weeks, the 15 boys and girls who comprised the Junior Commandos of the 2300 block of Devon Avenue in Chicago, Illinois, for example, collected more than 1,000 pounds of scrap metal. All in all, the Junior Commandos had, as Annie historian Bruce Smith denoted, thousands of youngsters scrambling through junk piles and knocking on doors to help Annie win the war. They were not the only ones. One August day in 1943, Jack Armstrong's announcer Norman Croft told boys and girls how they might approach neighbors for scrap collecting by citing work that Alden, a 6-year-old boy, and his, not surprisingly, unnamed 8-year-old sister did in their community. According to Kraft, who announced it to all of Armstrong's listeners across the country, Alden and his sister went door to door with the message, quote, please, lady, I'm a soldier's helper. Will you have some paper for us on our collection day? So apparently the duo was so successful that they warranted a mention on national radio. In addition to collecting scrap, children were also deeply committed to buying and selling savings, bonds, and stamps. Once again, their heroes and heroines on radio often coaxed them into shelling out their dimes for another bond or stamp. For example, in addition to pledging to write one letter a month to a soldier abroad, fighter pilots and squadron leaders of Jack Armstrong's Wright Fighter Corps also promised to make it a rule and think twice before spending on luxuries you don't really need. Instead, they were instructed to put that dime into war savings stamps. Tom Mix of the popular Tom Mix Ralston Straight Shooters frequently kept children up to date with war news and often tried to persuade them to do their parts to help win victory in Europe. He reminded his listeners, quote, the war isn't over yet, and it isn't won yet. In order to continue being a good home front soldiers, boys and girls had to keep right on buying and saving those war stamps. Children's radio programs often offered premiums that could facilitate their war work, or at the very least, help them create imaginary worlds where they might be able to do so. But now we're going to talk about how they were shoppers. In 1942, 10 cents and a label from Libby's Juice could get one a Victory airplane spotter. Right? Victory airplane spotter, courtesy of folks from Libby's and from Terry and the Pirates. Kits included detailed information on how to categorize planes by wing and tail shape, as well as pictures of 16 different kinds of aircraft with identifying descriptors. I don't know if they were expecting kids to see these airplanes at home. I certainly hope not. But they could save their Libby stamps and then get one of these guys here. In November of 1940, Little Orphanini and her sponsor Ovaltine promoted an ID chain tag, quote, just like the soldiers and aviators wear. If wearing an ID tag and chain while trying to spot U.S. aircraft in the sky was not hands-on enough for some of the war-hop children, they could also investigate their neighbors and try to find out where their allegiances really did lie with Captain Midnight's spy scope. It was a perfect tool for helping in this endeavor. Although in one episode, Susie used it to prevent jewel thieves from robbing a neighbor, imagine if boys and girls could utilize the same device to spy on their neighbors, friends, and family. Radio programs and their sponsors also used war as one reason children should not only invest in the premiums they offered, but also buy their products. In the days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Tom Mix's sidekick, Pecos, came on before the show to notify boys and girls that, quote, these days it's up to you and me and all of us to keep in the top of condition. Naturally, he added, the best way I know how to do this is to saddle up every morning with a hot dish of old Ralston. Right? So Ralston was not the only breakfast food to shamelessly use war to sell to children, and perhaps one of the most memorable sponsors was Ovaltine. Little Orphanini was synonymous with the product, and she and her longtime sponsor, Pierre Andre, peddled Ovaltine profusely. When Ovaltine switched allegiance from Little Orphanini to Captain Midnight in 1942, Captain Midnight relayed the message about Ovaltine being, quote, one of the richest sources of vitamins and minerals in the world, and broadcast it to children for the duration of the war. Children were encouraged to buy products that were supposed to help them with their duties of war, be it spying on their neighbors or staying fit and healthy. And they prepped young girls to take over the roles of their own mothers in more than one way. In addition to readying girls for making smart, economical, and nutritional choices for their future families, most radio programs of the era also depicted a world where women, and by extension girls, were relegated to the sidelines, right? They become sidekicks, a sad reality for many women at that age. Long gone were the days of Little Orphanini helping Daddy Warbucks out of jams within the comics. On the radio during the war, Annie was usurped by the very manly Captain Sparks. So even though the program was still called Little Orphanini, if you listen to the programs from the 1941 through, it's really all about Captain Sparks. Annie's hardly in it, right? She's become a sidekick. Despite the fact that by 1940 Little Orphanini mostly revolved around Sparks, at least the program was still named after the young girl. Very few programs that originated during the war could claim the same. Instead, most children's radio programs of the day, including Annie, featured girls in the role of sidekick. As historian William Tuttle has noted, whatever their mission, most of radio superheroes and super sleuths showed one characteristic: they were male. In addition to their diminished airtime, when girls or even adult women were on the air, they were often told to keep away from the action. In one Jack Armstrong episode, when Betty asks to accompany Jack and Billy and Uncle Jim investigate the noises they hear on their boat, Uncle Jim patronizingly tells her, you better stay below. And in the adventure program Magic Island, two men in one episode rebuke the wealthy survivor Mrs. Gregory. First, it's this ultra-manly man named Tex, whom she hired to help find her daughter. When they're in a jam, Gregory asks Tex, can't I help you? And though she has already proven herself quite resilient, supposedly the lone survivor from a shipwreck, right? I mean, this lady knows how to live. Tex only manages to muster, no, run along. Later in the episode, Gregory asks the teenager Jerry, right? Jerry, if she can help him, and Jerry answers, keep quiet. When Gregory insists, he replies testily, I said, keep quiet and let me use this radio. Right? So one of the more blatant examples of the decline of the girl heroine is found in the Tom Mix Ralston Straight Shooters program. During the early years of the radio program, Jane seemed to have not only a larger presence on the show, but also a more important one. So, for example, there's one episode where Tom Mix, during the Great Depression, is down on his luck. In fact, he's losing his TM Bar ranch. And Jane somehow manages to she finds a gold mine and uses that money to buy Tom Mix his ranch again, right? So Jane saves the day. But then during the war years, we kind of see the inverse happening. Jane seemed to fall in status, and instead of saving Tom, she's often saved by him or another man in the episode. In one episode, The Mystery of the Vanishing Herd, Jane and this against Nazis that she's actually said. Now, Joe lays it out for her, and he says, Jane, the food supply of this nation is at stake. A powerful new secret fighting plan at the airbase is in danger of being destroyed. You've got to fool that guard. Realizing the immensity of their job and the situation there, Jane redoubles her efforts, and she says, quote, I will. You bet I will. It's the last thing I do. Good girl, Begley barks. They then run for safety with Begley behind Jane to protect her, and he tells her, if they start to shoot, they'll hit me and not you. Shortly thereafter, with his body shielding Jane's, he is shocked, and with what seems like his last words, he convinces Jane to go ahead without him, and she runs to the horses and escapes from danger. So, despite the fact that, according to historian Lisa Othean, right, girls occupied liminal spaces where their contributions to the war effort were made marginalized, girls really, in the end, made the most of it. There was a dynamic balance between young girls' desires, proclivities, and abilities, and those they assumed because parents, society, or popular culture like radio told them to do. With the help of radio, girls managed to carve out a privileged place for themselves and become a needed faction to win the war. During the war years, girls were able to experiment with gender roles and norms, undergoing a metamorphosis in which they grew into wartime America as supporters, soldiers, shoppers, and sidekicks. Now, Princess Elizabeth's wartime message reminded them of their power. On that day, right, that I began with in 1940, when Princess Elizabeth took to the airwaves to fulfill part of her girly duty, right, that is to boost the morale and to comfort others, she opined, quote, we know, every one of us, that in the end, all will be well. With girls doing their all to win the war, it certainly seemed as if their efforts would not be in vain. And Princess Elizabeth continued, and when peace comes, remember, it will be for us children of today to make the world of tomorrow a better place. No doubt around the world, young boys and their sisters, young boys and their sisters who perhaps listen with a little more pride to hear a young girl like themselves addressing them, nodded their heads in agreement. So, thank you. Any questions? Oh yeah, please.
Why did Ovaltine switch halfway through the war? Is that because of the trend in the mail?
No, that's a good question. Little More Community had started bleeding listeners. It wasn't exciting enough, and that's one reason why Little More Community brings on Cats and Sparks, because Ovaltine did switch, right? They went over to the other program, and so once that happened, they realized the trend, and so they brought in Cats and Sparks to have that more manly and wartime feel.
Where did you get access to the radio programs?
Oh, okay, that's a great question. There are a variety of websites that offer these radio programs. Some of them not free, and so originally when I started doing research, I actually purchased them in CDs. But then over the years, they have become available on a variety of websites for free now. The best program, and one that I would have played a couple of clips for you, is the oldtimeradio.com. They have every radio program that you can possibly think of, all surviving copies. So that's a great source. Also in Chicago, Illinois, there's a Museum of Broadcasting. They have a number of programs there as well.
Can you post that on the event site so we can link to it?
Absolutely. Go and do that.
So have you looked at any, or have you listened to any radio programs after the war? Have they sort of followed the same kind of trajectory films did, like the Illinois, Bentley Tower, sort of extended?
Yes, that's, you know, interestingly enough, it actually begins before the war. So there are a lot of female adult characters in these radio programs that are like these femmes fatales or switching sides, right? And so they're double agents and switching sides. So that actually happened before the radio program, or before the war. I haven't listened to anything after the war, in particular because we start to move away from radio, right? Radio doesn't come, sort of becomes de rigueur